What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and in the aftermath of Spider-Man No Way Home, this has left a lot of people asking, where are we going to stand with the new Spider-Man movies? How are those films going to unfold, right? Because we know that Sony and Disney are working on a new trilogy for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And one of the other things that had come out recently, really with an interview that Tom Holland did with GQ, is that if he was playing Spider-Man after 30, he feels like he'd be doing something wrong. Now, he also cleared up this interview more recently, but the overall gist of what he was saying by virtue of the original interview and what he said as a follow-up to it is that in his mind, he doesn't want to play Spider-Man past 30 years old. And there's actually a couple different reasons for this. The first is because he's got other career aspirations, and that's not unreasonable, right? In Hollywood, there is such a thing as being typecast. A lot of you guys have heard of this. Robert Downey Jr. is a really good example of that. The guy's a phenomenal actor, but every time you see him, you will see him as Tony Stark, despite whatever movies he may make and how popular they are. Mark Hamill will always be known as Luke Skywalker. It's one of those things that Tom Holland wants to avoid. He doesn't want to always be seen as Peter Parker. Again, we mentioned it in a previous video, might be a little too late for that, but if he doesn't have any major blockbusters or huge franchises that basically pick up steam between now and the final film that he makes as Spider-Man, he'll basically be typecast. He'll always be viewed as Spider-Man. And so because of this, our back is against the wall to a degree insofar as what they're gonna do with his character, but I think I know what's going to happen with Tom Holland. I think Marvel Studios and Sony are gonna kill him off. So here's how I think things are gonna unfold, right? Let's start with this first movie. Let's kind of create a timeline here, right? We say like 30 years old is the cap. Well, Tom Holland's 25 years old right now. So if we go with the standard fare and we say with all the projects that Marvel has going on, we got like 2 years before the next solo Spider-Man film comes out, which seems pretty reasonable, right? Enough time to plan the film, principal photography, to start shooting, to basically do the editing, and then to release the movie. And we know they don't really shy against the idea of releasing or at least finishing a film at the 11th hour. Literally, as far as I'm aware, Spider-Man wasn't done with like editing until about 3 weeks before the film launched. Their backs were against the wall, so much so that the rumors are saying they didn't know or they thought they might have to actually delay the release of the film because they weren't quite done yet. But let's say it's like 2 years before the new Spider-Man film comes out. Let's say they rename the whole franchise and just call it like Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, right? That's the next movie. Tom Holland will be 27 years old. Let's say that it's 2 years after that when Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man 2 comes out. Now he's 29. You guys get it. He'll be 31 by the time the last movie comes out. So we'll say that's it. This third movie they're doing, that's the last time you see Tom Holland as Spider-Man in any capacity in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That means that he's finished, kaput, done. No more Peter Parker in the MCU. So I think the first Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, we'll just kind of go with that title, we'll just kind of call it that. Let's say the first Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man film, that's gonna show us what Peter Parker's life is like at the moment, right? It's gonna show us what's going on with Peter Parker. What's life like for him now that nobody remembers who he is, right? No one knows who Peter Parker is. And so by virtue of that, nobody knows who Spider-Man is. They simply just know that Spider-Man is a guy out there, but they don't know his identity. They're gonna show us what that life looks like. Are the characters of MJ and Ned Leeds still a part of the equation? Does he check on them? Or are they never going to be seen or heard from again? Are the statements that Ned Leeds made in saying like, hey Peter, I'm never gonna become a villain and turn against you or anything like that, is that something that is kind of foreshadowing, right? Would he become the Hobgoblin? I don't think so. I think Ned Leeds and MJ are done, right? I think like they're out of the picture. If we see them, it'll be him checking up on them, and like that'll be the extent of it, right? Maybe he'll get his own love interest, maybe he won't, I have no real idea. But the important thing here is it's going to give us that kind of scenario. Now, the question has to be asked, who would the main villain of this movie be? And the answer is, I don't necessarily know, right? I mean, when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of the things that we've learned over the years is that villains come in many forms. Sometimes they're as physical and tangible as like Thanos, right? Like a guy is coming to Earth to steal the last of the Infinity Stones and blink out half the life in the universe, and he would have been defeated had it not been for Star-Lord and Thor. Good going, guys. Other times, the villains are more abstract. They're not as physical. I mean, I guess maybe kind of a physical nature, but like a giant celestial is emerging from Earth and will destroy the Earth as they emerge, and so it's up to us, the Eternals, to stop them, right? It comes in many different forms. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the villain you see in this movie might be more circumstantial than anything else. I also wouldn't be surprised if we saw Peter Parker taking up some kind of gig at Horizon Labs. What's Horizon Labs? This is a think tank, right? Literally, the job of these guys is to just sit around all day and think up cool shit. Why does that matter? Because we know Horizon basically exists from the Morbius trailer, and we know Morbius is in the MCU because of Michael Keaton. And so the thing about this is that where it looked like the skyline from Morbius was basically the San Francisco skyline, I'm not gonna swear to that, I don't recall exactly what it looks like, it may very well be New York, that if Horizon is based out of San Francisco, that maybe they have a New York branch, and Peter Parker basically works out of that area. We do know that we're probably gonna see Peter Parker taking pictures of Spider-Man and selling them to the Daily Bugle. You can't not have that. That has to be in the movie. It's a cornerstone of Peter Parker. It's just part of what he does. But I think that's what the first movie is going to look like. It's kind of like, here's what life is like for Peter right now. But I think at the end of the first movie, the piece of the Venom symbiote that was left behind in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Spider-Man No Way Home is going to bond itself to Peter. And then the second movie, Peter Parker is going to become Venom. What I also think is going to happen here is they're going to introduce Miles Morales. And so in the second movie, what it's actually going to come down to is Peter fighting Miles Morales. But it won't just be Peter Parker, it'll be Venomized Peter Parker. And here's the reason why I think that works, right? The Venom symbiote in and of itself bonding to Peter, just from what we know when it comes to Eddie Brock, it has a kind of insatiable bloodlust, right? It wants to kill, it wants to destroy things. And I could certainly see Peter Parker taking somewhat of a humorous approach, similar to the way that Tom Hardy did it in the Venom movie, but I could also see him succumbing to it eventually. And the reason why is because if you talk to anybody out there who knows anything about the mental health profession, keeping your feelings and your struggles contained, that's how it pops off. And that's how people end up doing incredibly violent things. Now let's look at Peter Parker in the aftermath of Spider-Man No Way Home. No one knows who Peter Parker is. They've never heard of him, right? It's like he never existed. He's basically starting over. I mean, sure, we'd have to assume information like social security numbers and things like that are still intact, but he's getting his GED. So basically he never graduated high school, which kind of sucks because everyone he met there, right? Flash Thompson, who was kind of a dick, but also lovable at the same time, MJ, who we all adored, Ned Leeds, who we all thought was hilarious, and the goofy teacher of Peter Parker, who was kind of an idiot, but I'm really gonna kind of miss that guy. None of those people know who Peter Parker is. None of those people have ever heard of him. So he's literally starting from scratch. The death of Aunt May, Peter Parker remembers it all. No one else does, but he does. And unless he's talking to a therapist or someone out there that he is divulging his identity to, he's keeping all that inside. And so it's not that hard to believe if the Venom symbiote bonded itself to Peter Parker and then drove him to give in to his darker urges, all that comes to the surface, and Peter Parker basically becomes this vigilante that might even take a few lives. Now, I know the response to that would be, no, Rob, if Peter Parker became a vigilante and killed people, why would it come down to a fight between him and Miles? Like, the Avengers would step in or something like that? Would they though? Because in Captain America the Winter Soldier, Captain America was a national fugitive hunted by the world's biggest intelligence agency, and outside of Falcon and Black Widow, no one showed up. There was no Hawkeye. Tony Stark didn't even call to see how he was doing. No one appeared. In Spider-Man No Way Home, the movie that just came out, Peter Parker was an international fugitive, right? Hunted by multiple countries for his perceived crime of killing Mysterio in London, England. And you didn't hear hide nor hair of Sam Wilson or Winter Soldier or anyone, like with the exception of Doctor Strange. And it was only because he went to Doctor Strange. It wasn't like Doctor Strange came to him and said, hey Peter, all right, so I get that things are popping off, man. You're in a bad spot. I got this spell that can basically fix things, so let's go down into my dingy ass basement and see if we can't get this spell worked out. Or like if the Avengers called and said, hey Peter, I know things are popping off for you, we know you didn't kill Mysterio, so come hang out at the Avengers compound in upstate New York, where we probably have panic rooms that will keep you hidden away from everybody until things kind of calm down and you could figure out your next move. No, it was literally Peter just flying by the seat of his pants and then going to Doctor Strange and then screwing up a spell. So it's not outside the realm of possibility to believe that if we get the origin story of Miles Morales in Spider-Man 2, or even if we don't, right? I mean, literally Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home and Spider-Man No Way Home was like a 3-part origin story for Peter. So it's entirely possible Miles could just be introduced as this other guy who has spider powers and like is the only one who believes he can stop Peter, who has a Venom symbiote, and the two of them end up facing off. Now, maybe it ends up being that Miles, from his own experiences and so on and so forth, is able to talk Peter down, because maybe by that point, Miles' mother is already dead. That was a huge plot point for the character of Miles. The death of his mom, that was his Uncle Ben, right? Totally changed the way in which he saw himself as Spider-Man, and the fact that like there's collateral damage when it comes to him doing the kind of stuff that he does. Kind of made him a little bit darker for a little while, but like being able to bring that to the table and saying like, I lost someone close to me too, Peter, and kind of talking to him and all that kind of stuff, bringing Peter down, it provides motivation. It gives significance to Miles Morales. Miles can relate to Peter. His story's not that different from Peter. Miles has his own struggles, his own issues, right? The story of Miles is a pretty tragic one, right? He comes from a really, really poor part of New York. He attends a charter school, which for those of you guys who don't live in the States, a charter school is essentially when your public school system in your area is so shitty that you attend a lottery system to try to get into a better school, right? It's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad setup, but he goes to a charter school, right? His story's pretty tragic. It's pretty rough, but being able to bring all that stuff to the table and then identify with Peter that way would give us as the audience a reason to care about Miles Morales. More so than that, you look at him and you're like, man, this guy's awesome, right? So then from there, you go into Spider-Man 3. Now, the other part of this with the second Spider-Man movie could very well be that Peter's actions as Venom lead to him doing something that brings in Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock hates him. Maybe it's following the similar plot threads to Spider-Man 3 with Topher Grace and Tobey Maguire, where as Venom, he exposes Eddie Brock and costs him his career. Maybe it's something more visceral, where like he gets the girlfriend of Eddie Brock killed because he's not really caring about how his actions affect people. Whatever the case is, there is a hatred that develops between Eddie Brock and Spider-Man. And so at the end of that second movie, by way of Miles, Peter casts off the Venom symbiote, which bonds itself to Eddie Brock. But that goes into the third film, which is Spider-Man and Miles Morales versus Eddie Brock. Or maybe it's just Spider-Man versus Eddie Brock, right? Like Peter's like, no, this is my fight, right? Like this happened because of the kind of things that I did. I've been down this road before. I can solve my problems. I appreciate the help, Miles. You do your thing. Like you stay there. You stay home, whatever it is. I got this and I will take care of it. And ultimately, over the course of this movie, Peter Parker is killed by Venom. Maybe that leads to Miles Morales stepping in because he has his Venom blast, right? The electric shock that he can send out as part of his powers as a different version of Spider-Man, and he overcomes Venom that way. But whatever it is, it leads to the death of Peter Parker. Tom Holland is effectively written out. Now, I love the idea that either Peter Parker and Venom fight to the death and they both end up dying, or Miles Morales kills Venom where Peter Parker could not. And I know that hardcore Peter Parker fans will say, no, that's ridiculous, but like it's not though. And here's the reason why. The whole story behind Miles Morales was inaction, right? If you go back and you read the Ultimate Comics when Miles Morales originally appeared, and then you get like the events that led him to becoming Spider-Man in the first place, the way it played out is that Peter Parker had been beat to death, right? He was killed by the Sinister Six. Really the final blow I think was Green Goblin, but basically he was killed by the Sinister Six. And that Miles Morales, seeing it all unfold, could have done something. He could have like stepped in and helped Peter Parker, but he didn't, right? He didn't. He basically let Peter Parker die. And so you take that concept and you roll it over into the MCU, and it's basically a repeat. That yes, Peter told Miles, stay away. This is my fight. I will deal with it. And yes, Miles could have ignored that and he could have stepped in to help Peter and possibly saved his life, but he didn't. That's important because that gives motivation to Miles. It gives us a reason for why Miles is taking up the mantle of Spider-Man in the first place. One part is because there are just villains out there and New York needs a protector. And two, because he wants to honor the memory of Peter Parker. He wants to honor the memory of Spider-Man by saying like, yes, I'm sorry I failed you in the worst way, but I will honor your memory. I will live up to everything that you established as your role as Spider-Man, and I will treat it in an honorable way going forward. But that's my thought on these three movies. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section, right? Do you guys think that, like, I mean, it's okay, Rob, but it's not gonna work? Or do you think this is plausible? Because I really do believe, given all the little hints and things like that we've gotten so far, we're getting a Miles Morales film, right? Like, a Miles Morales movie is coming. As far as I'm aware, Kevin Feige's all but said it, right? He's all but confirmed it. But like, I would not be surprised if they kill off Tom Holland and they bring in Miles as the new Spider-Man. I really hope they do. I love Miles Morales. God, he's such a great character. I adore Miles. He's like my favorite version of Spider-Man. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.